All right. Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing today? How is everyone? Is anybody here? Oh, good. Oh, I need a nap too. There's been so much rain lately that it just makes me sleepy all the time. It's a good day for a nap because the sunshine's just not out right now. Um, all right. So this week we are getting started on our crime scene lesson, and it's going to be really fun. And I'll just tell you right now, we have a couple of assignments that are going to be due this week. So let's get there. Your crime scene quiz is going to be due tomorrow. So if you want to wait until after we're done with our lesson tomorrow, that's totally fine. Somebody asked me if we have guided notes for this section, and we do not as of right now. It is a ton of work to put together those guided notes, and I would love to be able to do that for every lesson, but but this PowerPoint will be on Canvas. This recording will be on Canvas, and something that I told my other class is that they said that they don't like to just read through, and I totally get that. But what you should do is with those big, long reading sections in Canvas, if you don't want to read the whole thing, then you at least need to go through and find yourself like some key terms, some key ideas that you should like write down and pay attention to, especially things like vocabulary, people, dates, but also like, you know how like every paragraph has like a theme or like a thesis statement. You should pay attention to at least the main idea of each part and use those to help you study for the quiz. Because I understand if you can't absorb all the information, but you can go through and pick out those ideas, okay? And also, I feel like that's a good skill to have in general anyways, especially for like college, because you guys are preparing to go into that. And if you can learn how to take good notes, that's really a great skill to have. So just go ahead and get into the habit of learning to take good notes by picking out key information. And then we have a project, but don't let that term scare you. That will be due on September 3rd, and it's called the Crime Scene Sketch, which you're literally making me a crime scene sketch. It's going to be so fun. So you're going to be, I'll explain this in detail. Yeah, don't worry. I'll explain this in detail on Thursday. We'll go over all the details about it. And basically, it's going to be you're drawing a sketch with very detailed instructions, if that makes sense. So I have like a checkoff list for you to put on there of things that need to be on the crime scene sketch. It's not just like an art project. Actually, I really don't care about the art of the project. The thing that I care about the most is the details. So we'll get into that on Thursday. So don't panic. Don't worry. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fun. Okay? Don't worry, James. All right. Let's talk about what happens at a crime scene. And I know, please don't panic. It's going to be fine. When we're talking about crime scene, I know that we talk about TV shows a lot and say that they're inaccurate, but there are some accurate things in TV shows, and so I'm sure that some of you have had some exposure to what happens to a crime scene just by seeing it somewhere else. So tell me the things that you think happen at a crime scene. What happens? Who gets called in? What do they do? Yeah, photos are taken. You can look at this picture to help you figure out what happens at a crime scene. Okay, places are marked off. You mean like cordoned off here? Okay, they take swabs of evidence. Investigators are called. What does this little thing here do? What does this cordon do? Keeps people out. And why do we do that? What's the point? Yeah, exactly. We don't want to contaminate the evidence. We don't want to interfere with the investigation. Exactly. What else? What else happens at a crime scene? Who shows up? Who gets called? Detective. Yes. Yes, a crime happens at the crime scene. If you were a victim of a crime, who would you call first? Yes. You'd call 911, right? And the police would show up. Anybody else? Mm-hmm. Who else would show up? The police. Mm-hmm. But when you call 911, who do they send? Okay, news crew maybe, but that's not of any benefit to us necessarily as crime scene investigators. Okay, paramedics or EMS responders, possibly. The fire department. Good. Okay, and then they take pictures of the evidence. What else do they do? You see these things here? Yeah, they number it. And why do they do that? Why do they put numbers there? Any ideas? To keep track? Yeah, when they're making a crime scene sketch or labeling their pictures, they can make like an easy legend, is what we call it. You can just put a list out to the side and say, okay, evidence number 1 was whatever that is. It looks like maybe some pills or something. I don't know. Evidence number 2 was an empty beer bottle. Evidence number 3 was the body. Okay. And it just makes it easier than writing those things out on the sketch or on the photograph itself. Okay. Yes, 4 with the knife. Exactly. Okay, so let's look at this. You guys said you call 911, first responders arrive. And first responders include law enforcement officers, EMS, and firefighters. Okay. And their job, especially the police officers, their job is to secure the crime scene. They first make sure that everybody's safe so that the crime has stopped. For example, like an active shooter case, they would make sure that the shooter is subdued. And then they're going to secure the crime scene so that no evidence is contaminated. Surprisingly, EMS has a similar job, right? Their first job is to take care of their patient, but also, let's say it's a case of like assault or even rape or something like that, their job is to preserve the evidence that's on the person. So if the clothes have to be changed, say to like a hospital gown, they would bag the clothes and save those for evidence. And if they got to the hospital, they would keep the person from taking a shower or getting rid of any evidence that might be found there. So their job is also to, in a way, preserve their own crime scene, but in a different sort of understanding as we know it. Okay. Yeah, gunshot residue, for example. Exactly. Good point, James. Okay. And then they identify witnesses or people involved and send any victims to the hospital. They would want to keep the witnesses there in order to tell their account of what happened. They're going to obtain search warrants before they just go digging through whatever they need to get evidence and conduct a walkthrough of the scene. They're going to photograph the scene and create a sketch so that they can label where things were at what time, where they found the evidence. And then after they've logged where they found the evidence, then they can collect the evidence in the proper manner. And there's certain protocols for every type of evidence, and we'll talk about those as we go on throughout the year. Okay? Any questions about what happens there? Any comments, possibly? Yeah, it's a good TV show, James. I like that. Okay. Crickets, yes. Here are some vocabulary words for this section. Circumstantial evidence. And this is evidence that infers a conclusion but is not direct evidence. What does infer mean? We talked about this last week. What is like an inference? Yeah, a deduction or like a hypothesis. Yeah, it's like using basic reasoning to come to a conclusion, but it is not direct evidence. What do we mean by direct evidence? Yeah, an educated guess. Exactly, Michaela. What is direct evidence, though? You know what, James? That would actually be circumstantial, believe it or not. Good guess, though. Yeah, that would still be circumstantial, though. Okay, all of these are still actually circumstantial, though. Direct evidence is a very narrow category. So it's okay if you don't know what it is. I just wanted to see if you can guess. There you go, James. Like video or an eyewitness account. Those are the only kinds that are considered direct evidence. Would be like a video of the actual crime happening or an eyewitness account of what happened. Everything else is circumstantial. So even fingerprints, DNA, weapons, blood spatter, ballistics, everything else is circumstantial. Okay. Yeah, it can be somewhat reliable, though, James, as far as did you see this person at the crime scene supposedly committing a crime? And I mean, that's a yes or no question. But you're right, it can be biased and it can be a little bit unreliable to recall a memory like that. All right, so we have our first responders who are our trained emergency personnel like fire, police, and medical. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it can be biased and it can be a little bit tricky when you're recalling memories. Okay, we have Locard's exchange principle that talks about every contact leaves a trace. It's how we know that there's physical evidence at our crime scenes. And then physical evidence includes all evidence which is observable, measurable, and concrete, and not based on opinion. Just like James said, some of those eyewitness accounts are based on opinion, so they are not physical evidence. And then police will secure the crime scene and take charge and make sure that evidence is not contaminated. All right, here's a new term that we haven't seen yet. This is called corpus delicti, and it's a term that refers to the principle that a crime must be proved to have occurred before a person can be convicted of committing that crime. So for example, if you want to convict someone of committing a murder, you have to at least prove that a murder occurred, okay? It's called the body of a crime, okay? So somebody asked me in my last class, well, what if you can't come up with any evidence or a body or something like that? And certainly that makes it very difficult to convict someone of a crime. I used to listen to this podcast called Up and Vanished, which we may listen to some of that in this class. But the particular case was one in Georgia where a woman disappeared. But they had no body that showed up. They didn't have any real good physical evidence. I mean, they had some pieces of evidence like a glove, a couple other things, but they weren't really reliable. There were no eyewitnesses. And so those kinds of cases are really hard to investigate or convict someone of because you don't have proof that a crime occurred. See some people typing, so I'll leave some space for questions here. It was solved from glitter? Oh, you know of one case that was solved from glitter. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, you're right, Olivia. The more advanced technology gets, the easier it is to find some evidence and to be able to analyze it as well. All right, so what would be some examples of corpus delicti? What do you think? So if you wanted to prove that a murder occurred, what would be a good example of corpus delicti? What would be a piece of evidence that definitely points toward a crime having been committed? Yeah, there you go, a dead body. Okay. What about if you wanted to prove that someone was, yeah, Deja, you know, blood would be a good piece of evidence. Whether or not it points towards specifically a murder would be difficult because it could just be from an injury, right? But it would point us in the right direction, right? What if you wanted to prove that somebody had been dealing drugs? What would be a good example of this? What would you need to find? Yeah, a stash of money. What else? Yeah, the actual drugs, right? So you have to have proof that a crime occurred before someone can be convicted of that crime. So let me tell you something about, like, for example, in a situation of like simple assault, if someone says, oh, well, yeah, that's a good example too, James. If someone said, oh, well, so-and-so punched me in the face. Well, unless you've got like a bruise on your face, broken nose, unless their hand is injured from punching you in the face, then there's no real way that you can prove that they punched you in the face, right? So in a lot of cases, those things can't be convicted because there's no proof that the crime ever happened. Okay? Yeah, I mean, even if it did happen, though, and we don't have proof that the crime happened, it's going to be very difficult to prosecute that kind of crime. Does that make sense, James? All right. So talking about circumstantial versus direct evidence. I mentioned this at the beginning of the lesson today. So circumstantial evidence doesn't, I'm sorry, let me rephrase. Circumstantial evidence might place the victim at the scene, but it was not witnessed by a human or a recording, okay? And examples of these include prints, weapons, hair, fibers. Can you guys think of other things that would be circumstantial evidence? Okay, blood. Bodily fluids, yes. What else? Footprints, DNA. Yeah, basically anything that's not a direct piece of evidence, right? Because let's say that you find a dead body with stab marks in it, okay? And there's a bloody knife laying next to them. What could you infer, possibly? What could you infer about the knife? What would you just kind of assume? Okay, maybe you'd find fingerprints there. We'll get to that in a second. But just off the bat, if there's a stabbed person, yeah, you would think that that's the weapon used, right? Now, if you look at the knife itself and you find some fingerprints and they match someone in the database, let's say they match Mr. Smith, then what would you assume about Mr. Smith? Or what would you infer? Okay, that you got the murderer. Well, that's the point, Deja, right? Yeah, we would assume that he was the one that at least owned the knife or used it to stab the victims. But you're right, Deja. What if Mr. Smith was just cooking in his kitchen, used the knife, set the knife down, and then, yeah, was cutting up some beets or something, right? And then, or even what if a criminal came in and was using gloves and used that to stab the person and then left the knife there? We can't just assume that Mr. Smith is the murderer and he used that as the murder weapon. However, if we had a security camera, yeah, it could be all sorts of things, right? If we had a security camera and it's pointed right at Mr. Smith and we see him pick up that knife and stab that person, then that's pretty direct, right? It's pretty straightforward. open and shut case. I mean, unless somebody like hacked the footage and made this amazing like recreation of the crime scene, it's pretty obvious that Mr. Smith committed that crime, right? You see the difference between circumstantial and direct? And lawyers really get a hold of people who just use circumstantial evidence. They can say, yeah, but you know, it could be this or it could be this. You know, you can come up with a million excuses to why something could be at a crime scene. And of course, the more circumstantial evidence that you have stacked up against someone, the more convincing it is that they committed that crime. You could possibly convince a jury that that person did, in fact, commit the crime. But direct evidence is really the only one that's going to be like, okay, done deal, this person committed the crime. What do you mean, direct, Olivia? Is that what you're talking about? Okay, so, I mean, you could have video of someone leaving a crime scene and that would help you know who was there. But if you saw the actual crime, that would be really direct evidence. And again, eyewitness testimonies are considered direct evidence, but just like James said, even they are not as reliable as, say, like a recording or even a picture of what happened. Because it can change, okay? You could be wrong if it's just going from memory. But let's say, for example, that Mr. Smith, you have a hair sample from him at the crime scene. You have where he cut his finger, and so he left blood at the crime scene. His fingerprints were on the weapon. The weapon was registered to him. It was in his house, okay? Then the more things that you have like that are circumstantial, that stack up against each other, the more obvious it becomes to like a jury that they might be the one that was the actual person who committed the crime. Okay? All right. We'll move on from there unless you guys have any questions. Okay, let's not get into this just yet because we just covered that today and I'd like to save some of that for tomorrow. So I'm going to pause our recording and have you guys go into Canvas and look over and make yourself some notes of the lesson for this week. Okay, so we're going to take some time to read and take notes of our lesson. And then when we come back together, I have a video for us to watch and we'll discuss that right before we leave class. So let me just pause our recording here. Hey, all right, good. That's fine. All right, so I have a video to share with you, and then we can discuss it, and then that will be it for today. So I didn't get a chance to upload it into the what's it called? What's the thing called? I didn't get it. Oh, into the assets. I didn't get a chance to upload it here for you guys to watch. So I'm just going to give you the link in the chat to get to the video. And it should take you about 6 minutes to watch, and then we'll come back and discuss what you learned, and we will wrap up class for the day. So don't leave until after you've watched this and we've discussed it. Okay, so hopefully most of you are done with your video at this time. So we're going to discuss some of those techniques that they were talking about tomorrow, about how they handle a crime scene and the kinds of procedures that they take at a crime scene. Let me just do this. There's my contact information. I did just receive information that someone else in my department made guided notes for you all, so I will be posting those to Canvas today if you would like access to those. I think I will post this PowerPoint today, maybe tomorrow, depending on what I decide to do, because we haven't covered the rest of the PowerPoint. I'll probably go ahead and post it today. And so you guys can go ahead and be dismissed, but come to class prepared to learn tomorrow. I'll see you guys later. Bye.